giant of limitless power at man's command. And where was it science found that giant? In the atom, a particle so infinitely small that it takes over 100 billion atoms to make up the head of a pin.
This is Out of the Basement, a podcast dedicated to radiation medicine.
This is Dr. Jason Beckton coming at you out of the green Vermont mountain basements here after an unintentional brief hiatus where mostly, as some may have noticed, I have laid off talking about the radiation oncology case rate proposal, or ROCR, where I was waiting for my paper or my letter to the editor to be published in Practical Radiation Oncology, or PRO, which I submitted on January 31st, 2024. And after some back and forth with one of their associate editors, Dr. James Yu, who happened to be the first author of the paper I was responding to, it was accepted in the first or second week of February or something. I didn't really want to say too much to somehow unintentionally get my letter unpublished, or I don't even know, retracted. That's the word. That's technically the word that scientists use, so they tell us. And however, in the meantime, from the submission of my letter responding to the only ROCR publication after it was announced, the ROCR legislation itself was brought to Congress, and we finally got to see the text of the legislation, or the proposed legislation. So the silence was not one of apathy, but more one of prudence. And I've been thinking a lot in my silence about what we should talk about next, because, well, my silence has been sandwiched in between screams, a scream sandwich. Everyone else appears to be equally silent on both sides, which is just incredibly bizarre to watch. So really, if you look at the proposed, or the proposal itself from Astro, there was the announcement in the newsletter back a little over a year ago now, at the end of June 2023. There was the pseudo town hall. There was the 1 hour presentation at the conference, the Astro Conference breakfast. There was the PRO publication, and that was about it. I think I'm forgetting one or two things. There was that weird partnership announcement with ACR and ACRO and stuff that wasn't, strictly speaking, a pro-ROCR announcement. It was more of a, hey, quit cutting our reimbursement sort of thing, and the word ROCR happened to be there, but it was not anyone endorsing outright. And just a lot of radio silence. In my conversations in real life, because no one will really respond to me online, but in my conversations in real life about ROCR and topics such as this, it really, in my opinion, just has to do with a massive lack of knowledge. And I shouldn't say just, there are many reasons people are reluctant to engage in these sorts of things, but the issue of medical reimbursement in the United States is one of the most ridiculously complex things that has ever been created. And there's virtually zero formal education for the people who are sort of key to the system, which would be those of us allegedly called doctors. And there's no, maybe this has changed more recently. I sincerely doubt it, but there's no course in medical school, often no even single day dedicated to medical business management or economics or anything of the sort. And there's no formal residency pathway thing. There's basically nothing. And so back in the day, the olden days, pre-2010, pre-consolidation, the way most physicians went about learning this was through practical experience, or when there was still a large component of private practice physicians, you had to learn this stuff because that's how you paid the bills. If you didn't learn it, well, you wouldn't survive. So there's a lot of on-the-job experience learning. In the past 10, 15 years, with the massive rise in consolidation and the huge health systems we see now, and the 75, 80% of physicians being W-2 employees, which has never been the case, there's just been a complete drop of the ability to learn these things through experience, where that is part of the reason consolidation happened, was that regulations became so onerous and the reimbursement for the physician fee schedule was cut so drastically compared to the facility fee schedule that it just made sense to partner with hospitals and let them take care of the paperwork, the overhead. And that's great if you were a partner in a private practice that had been going on for 20, 30 years and you were looking at retiring, and it was a way to offload these insane paperwork requirements. But the rest of us, for the younger generation, going right from medical school to residency to a W-2 employed position, there is no formal mechanism by which you could learn this stuff with any sort of rigor. And the only way that you could do that if you were in that pathway would be through intentional self-directed learning. And I don't know if anyone has looked at these things, but it's not great resources out there. And the capacity to have informed conversations about these sorts of things has been drastically atrophied. And even when I talk to physicians who were formerly in private practice, they've been out of it for so long that a lot of it's skill rot. It's mental atrophy, where this is a muscle, and unless you use the muscle, it goes away. And I suspect that not only are radiation oncologists in particular very conflict averse, and even just any sort of disagreement is seen as a conflict, the ability to even engage in this discussion is sorely lacking, which is concerning, and for multiple reasons. So I figured the best way would be to try to keep these podcast episodes shorter, because, while I enjoy listening to our podcast, I have been accused of being slightly abnormal before. So I figure we'll do some shorter episodes, and maybe we can all learn something along the way, including me, mostly me. And that's actually what this is usually about, is I am trying to learn things for myself, and then I just talk about it digitally. To lay the foundation of how I think about this topic and how I argue that we all should think about this topic is really why do we care about this? And it seems absurd on its face, but when I started to consider how these discussions are framed, how this whole concept is framed about physician and medical reimbursement, I think that the machine of medical education and training really does us a disservice, and that because, and I know I harp on this a lot, but because of the W-2 employment phenomenon, if you are a doctor who goes from high school to undergrad to med school to residency to an attending physician, even if you have some level of employment outside of that, you are a part of a system, and the system was built before you got there. You progress through the system in logical steps, or, well, arguably, hopefully logical steps. And you can do very little to affect that system. The system is what it is. And we humans love that. Just we love this so much. We may say we don't, but we love structure. And I feel like that engenders a incredibly restrictive, in the box sort of thinking pattern. And I want to just reframe this entire sort of conversation and thinking about what are we talking about with things like ROCR? And from the top, we are providing a service, whether you want to call it a calling or not, or however. That's not what this conversation is about. In bare bones terminology, medicine is a service provided by one party to another. And as with anything that is an exchange of value, the price of such or said valuable product needs to be determined. And so it's a lot easier when we deal with something like a number 2 pencil. There is a cost to building that number 2 pencil. And so if you are selling a number 2 pencil, when you price out each unit of those pencils, you can factor in the cost of materials, the cost of machinery, the cost of labor, the cost of shipping. There's a series of discrete things that you can price out a cost to produce said pencil. And then you can mark it up X percent, whatever is appropriate or arguably appropriate. And that's what you price the pencil at. So each unit of pencil is a very clear set of steps to arrive at a price. Whether or not you think it's fair is a different thing. So you can't do that in service-based economies or service-based industries. In medicine, especially in something like radiation oncology, but in medicine, how do you price that? How do you price to be grandiose? How do you price saving a life? It's really hard, right? Even if you're not saving a life, any sort of medical intervention, it doesn't have those unit costs. And this has been a dilemma since the start of time. And the RVU system, what we currently use now, this system of medical reimbursement is not how it's always been. This is actually pretty new. And because this has always been recognized, where the American medical system is so bizarre in this setup where we have insurance. So this is an age-old frustrating talking point about price transparency, where the consumer is removed from paying for the product. And as many would argue, the consumer can never truly be an informed consumer, where unless you are also a radiation oncologist, are you as the patient going to really be able to, in the moment, having never heard any of this before, accurately understand my version of, say, prostate cancer treatment versus the next nearest linear accelerator radiation oncologist version of prostate cancer treatment? Can you make an informed decision? And then, even assuming you can make it that far, if you were able to get an accurate sort of price estimate from each of us, could you determine if you felt it was fair or not? And price and value are two very different things, of course. But, these things the short answer is no, right? And so we've developed all these surrogate systems and many things over the years. And because, even the concept of insurance is relatively new. So the development of the RVU CPT, this current system, was born starting in the 1980s. So the enactment of the Medicare Physician Fee Schedule, or MPFS, was part of the Congressional Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1989. And that mandated something called an RBRVS, or the Resource-Based Relative Value Scale. And it was for reforming physician payment under Medicare. So it was passed in the OBRA legislation of 1989, and the RBRVS was implemented in 1992. And you want to get really nerdy, wonky about this, is interesting, but the methodology for this system was developed in the late 80s, and I believe it was at Harvard. I don't have it in front of me, but they created this numerical weighting system for, at the time, 7,500 or more than 7,500 current procedural terminology, or CPT codes, that were reflective, allegedly, of the complexity, time, training, and resources used to perform a procedure or provide a service. And the Physician Fee Schedule replaced the existing Medicare physician payment system of quote unquote customary, prevailing, and reasonable charges, under which physicians were paid according to the historical record of the charge for the provision of each service. And so really it's this 1992 implementation of the RBRVS MPFS Physician Fee Schedule that gave us this relative value of services. And the RVU, just to remind everyone, is a service based on three components: the physician work to perform the service, the practice expense associated with the service, and the professional liability expense for the provision of a service. And the physician work component is the most complex because it has 4 categories of input. So you've got time, mental effort and judgment, technical skill, and psychological stress, aka the time and intensity involved in providing a medical service. And the payment for any sort of a procedure service depends on its assigned RVUs and then the conversion factor. So under a separate section 1848E of the Social Security Act, CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, apply a geographic practice cost indices, or GPCI, in the calculation, which then adjusts. And I run through that engaging summary of these things because the question then becomes, well, how do the values of these procedures and services become derived? The relative value of an RVU, where does that come from? And that is where we get the Relative Value Scale Update Committee, or the RUC, which is under the infamous AMA, or American Medical Association. And ostensibly, it was formed to exercise its First Amendment right to petition the federal government. And so the RUC has no legal authority. The RUC makes recommendations to CMS, and CMS can choose to incorporate their recommendations or ignore them outright. So that's another component of this. So the RUC is composed of 31 or 32 members. It sometimes goes back and forth. And again, it's not directly responsible for setting the reimbursement rates for Medicare, but it does heavily influence the process. And the RUC is not a licensed federal advisory committee, and it is not subject to the advisement standards of other committees as outlined in the Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972. But it does function in the spirit of one of those committees. And as we have kind of heard about in other sort of conversations, the advisory committee members of the RUC working with other members of their specialties and neighboring specialties, they develop RVU recommendations using survey methods. And it's been very interesting when I went to go read about this, because one, I didn't know that, the way you hear RUC talked about, it's like that they have law or godlike advisory capacities and what they say goes, and it's really not that case. But more interestingly, historically, we're only on about year 32, so implementation in 1992, so slightly over 30 years since we've had this current system in place. And in the beginning, CMS accepted about 90% of the recommendations made by the RUC, but then it started to kind of go downhill. And in 2014, for example, only about 76% of the recommendations were implemented by the CMS. Obviously, I'm glossing over quite a bit here, but just setting the stage for really my point being that it hasn't always been this way and it won't always be this way, but we are inclined to have a sense of things as such. And I bring this up for the point that no one is happy with fee-for-service. And so when I have issues with ROCR, it is not that I think fee-for-service is great. It is not that I think episode-based payments are evil. I think the opposite. Well, maybe not strictly the opposite, but I definitely think that there are significant flaws with our current system. And I think that episode-based payments have the potential to alleviate some of those issues. But the issue is that no system is perfect. And it is incredibly bizarre to me that we have this dichotomy of it's either this system, our existing system, or episode-based payments. How about a hybrid system or something of that sort? Or just getting out of this two-choice dichotomous thing we always seem to be arguing about. There are more creative solutions in the world, but that's for a different time. But I also wanted to switch over to the initial Astro ROCR report, because really the original one from last year does a great job of summarizing where these RVU fee-for-service systems sort of take us in terms of setting the table for why we care about these things. So in the historical look at how we got here. So the other favorite point of mine, so radiation therapy is furnished either in a hospital outpatient department or a freestanding center. To say again, freestanding does not equal private practice. When we talk about these sites of service, you can be freestanding and academic or hospital outpatient and private practice. And I can say this because I have been both personally. So freestanding does not equal private practice. You cannot equate saving, quote unquote, saving private radiation oncology with saving freestanding. Those are not the same thing. Just to get on my favorite soapbox there. But so in terms of hospital outpatient or freestanding, Medicare pays differently for the same services provided in different settings because of differing statutory requirements in provision of technical and professional services. So in the hospital payment system, the technical services are paid for, assuming they're provided in an outpatient setting, a hospital outpatient. And whereas freestanding radiation therapy centers are paid under the technical component of the MPFS, and the professional component of the reimbursement is paid under the PFS and is adjusted depending on whether the physician service is provided in a hospital, outpatient department, or a freestanding center. And so this is kind of what we were talking about before. So that those same components, so everything is a division of a division. but you have technical and professional components of a reimbursement, and the amount of those technical and professional reimbursements are adjusted based on whether you are providing those services and procedures in an hospital outpatient department or a freestanding center. And there's no kind of stone tablet dictum for how your practice is determined to be under one or the other. And actually, that's a core issue. So whenever you hear about people debating the site-neutral issue of Medicare reimbursement, this is kind of the core of the problem. And the issue has been, as consolidation has occurred, so when you had hospital systems billing as hospital outpatient departments start buying up physician practices, and this is true for all of medicine, this isn't just radiation oncology, when hospital systems started buying up physician practices, those practices, which were formerly providing medical services and billing under a freestanding reimbursement fee schedule, which was less, they suddenly were providing the exact same services, but because they were now part of the hospital system, they were billing under the hospital outpatient system, which reimburses more. And that's a key issue for a lot of things, and why there's a lot of talk about site neutral payments, because there's a lot of consequences to the era of consolidation we find ourselves in. And, if you have Dr. Bekta's radiation therapy one-man band show let's just use where I'm at right now. So I'm in Rutland, Vermont, and I'm in a hospital, so it doesn't really work. But let's say I built my own LINAC in Rutland, Vermont, and I own the LINAC, and it was my practice top to bottom. It was my small business. I own the LINAC, I own the building, I employed the staff, I was the sole doctor. In that setting, I would be billing as a freestanding center. And then let's say the University of Vermont came in and said, "Hey, Dr. Bekta, would you like to be part of the UVM network?" And I said, "Sure." And I came to some sort of agreement whereby I continue to practice at my one-man band show. But instead of me owning everything, UVM buys me out in terms of the overhead. So, I would negotiate this if I were doing it. I'm not going to give you what I would really do, but let's just say I sell them everything. On my end, I no longer have to worry about the overhead. So because when you're owning one of these freestanding centers, you have to worry about how you keep the lights on, how the toilets flush. It's a small business, period, the end. And a huge benefit to partnering with a system is you don't have to worry about that. They have to worry about that. Now, the trade-off is, sure, you no longer get to keep all of the revenue. So, and this is how you get into the whole PE, private equity, VC stuff, where why would people sell in the first place, physicians? Well, there are some people who value things more than money, and one of those is time. And so, there would probably be a lump sum sort of payment up front or some sort of structured payment system, but you are making less money in certain circumstances, depending on how you structure the deal. The trade-off is time and stress. And so you are handing off, in my case, I'd be handing off that to the University of Vermont. And I would continue in this theoretical example. Now, again, this is not actually how it is here, but this is just my example. But so let's say I sold my formerly solo owned practice to UVM and they took over, and I continued to work there without missing a beat. Let's say the deal closes on Friday, where my solo private practice becomes part of the UVM network, and it opens up on Monday as part of the UVM network. And I change nothing, maybe put some logos on the door, but now we could theoretically start billing Medicare, whereas before I was billing as a freestanding center. Well, now I'm part of a hospital network. We could do the exact same thing, change nothing, and now all of a sudden we can bill at a higher rate or get reimbursed at a higher rate simply because I'm a hospital outpatient. And this simple fact, because this is what's actually happening, this has significantly increased the cost of medicine in America through consolidation. I don't have it up in front of me, but I think there's one GAO report estimates that if this had been, or if this stops, or if this is reversed, so all the formerly freestanding practices, not just in RADOC, I'm talking about all of medicine, but if everything that used to be freestanding and became hospital outpatient because of consolidation went back to freestanding rates, it would save, it's close to $1 billion. I think it's $810 million. And I don't remember if that's total or per year, it's a lot. This costs a lot. And so this is part of why consolidation happened. And so that's an important part to remember in this. Now, returning to Astro's own document talking about history, the technical component of payment in these payment systems. So again, we're talking about reimbursement separated into outpatient versus freestanding. And of those reimbursement rates, you have technical and professional. And they're historically, at least the technical reimbursement for hospital outpatient is higher, with the argument being that the cost to run and maintain a hospital is higher. And a similar sort of math is done to justify the higher physician rate in hospital versus freestanding. And obviously, many people, doctors, I don't know if anyone is happy with the system. I think it's unlikely that, unless a code is wildly misvalued, I think most of the time physicians who pay attention to this stuff is like, well, this is not accurate. You are not accurately reimbursing me. No one's really happy with the system, but especially in radiation oncology, we are really expensive. The capital investment up front is a lot. We're talking a minimum. If you're building a center from scratch, we're talking about a minimum of like $5 or $6 billion just right off the bat. A linear accelerator, if you have an existing vault, a new linear accelerator by itself is like $3 million. And, it's very different than like psychiatry. And another big thing that has happened, we all know about the rate cuts are every year, physician payment gets cut through Medicare, usually through cuts to like the conversion factor. The other big thing is it was recognized that the RVU system, the fee-for-service system, disproportionately, allegedly overvalues procedures instead of cognitive services, so like primary care. And the solution to this was an attempt to, through a budget neutral method, meaning changing none of the money allocated to our reimbursement, increase the reimbursement to the cognitive specialties, to like the primary cares. The only way to do that is at the expense of the procedural based specialties. So that's kind of also been contributing to our cuts over the last several years. And another specific complaint is that the formula to calculate these physician payments has basically generated negative or 0% updates for most of the years during this timeline. And the end result is all of Medicare reimbursement has been going down for all of us everywhere. And you can provide the exact same service, and the amount that Medicare reimburses you is different everywhere based on location. So, because you got to remember, is it hospital outpatient? Is it freestanding, and geography? So if I provide, let's say I do 70 gray and 35 fractions VMAT for a definitive P16 positive head and neck cancer treatment. So one fraction of that VMAT head and neck plan, one fraction is going to be paid differently if I deliver it here at my hospital in Vermont, or next door if I was a freestanding center in New Hampshire, or if I was a hospital in South Carolina, or if I was a freestanding center in Colorado, and you get the picture. So there is significant variation for what amounts to be the same work. Now there's a whole other argument about skill and experience and all these things, and that's a different thing for a different time. But at the end of the day, it's ostensibly the same treatment, and the costs are often pretty similar. So like a variant TrueBeam, a brand new one, is going to cost pretty similar, bearing whatever discounts you can negotiate out of them, but it's going to be a pretty similar cost. And then, but sure, electricity costs different, and property taxes is different. And the point being, this is a mess. And I just wanted to I'm going to pause there on this part of things for now, but I just wanted to have everyone back on the same page of why do we care about this? How do we get here? What are we doing now? Does it matter? Why does it matter? But part of why I chose to break these ROCR episodes up, or policy episodes, or whatever you want to call them, beyond the fact that, again, I enjoy 2-hour episodes, but perhaps others don't, is the unexpected Supreme Court rulings from last week, or when I'm recording this, it's last week. And just to take a little sidebar here, I would consider myself politically homeless. in that I stopped paying attention to regular corporate media stuff like more than 10 years ago. So I am so far removed from these arguments people have. I get confused. Like I genuinely will hear somebody will get worked up over something and I have no idea even the concept of what they're talking about. And then my ex Twitter feed is very tailored mostly to medicine and things of that ilk. And so my algorithm is pretty skewed. Sometimes things break into my algorithm, these stupid politics that I don't want to see about. And when you're this far out of it for so long, the blatant manipulation based on tribalism, it's like, are they even trying anymore? Like, do people fall for this stuff? I don't get it. And it seems so obvious. It's painful, but maybe I can't tell if it's always been this way. And I just didn't see it before I never really watched or cared about most of these things. I mostly, as people may be able to tell, I mostly do my own thing. But the panic over everything in general, it's not good for your heart. I'm going to put it like that. So the Chevron deference case, which seems to be bringing some level of panic to people who identify in a certain way. I don't think it means what you think it means. Now, granted, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I don't think it means what I think it means. But for those who are not aware, on Friday, the Supreme Court overturned something called Chevron, the Chevron case or Chevron deference. And let's bring in my good friend, the robot, to explain it to us.
By a vote of 6-3, the justices overruled their landmark 1984 decision in Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council, which gave rise to the doctrine known as the Chevron Doctrine. Under that doctrine, if Congress has not directly addressed the question at the center of a dispute, a court was required to uphold the agency's interpretation of the statute as long as it was reasonable. But in a 35-page ruling by Chief Justice John Roberts, the justices rejected that doctrine, calling it fundamentally misguided.
And when I Googled this to pull some of these transcripts out, just to make it clear, this means moving forward, meaning that if there's a federal agency, the point of why I'm bringing this up is CMS. So if CMS has made regulations as a federal agency, overturning the Chevron doctrine does not overturn anything an agency has ever done. So everything, as of this moment, everything is the same. What this applies to is open cases or cases moving forward, but no regulations have been repealed by this, just to be really clear. But let's continue on with my robot.
Chevron deference, Roberts explained in his opinion for the court on Friday, is inconsistent with the Administrative Procedure Act, a federal law that sets out the procedures that federal agencies must follow, as well as instructions for courts to review actions by those agencies. The APA, Roberts noted, directs courts to decide legal questions by applying their own judgment, and therefore makes clear that agency interpretations of statutes, like agency interpretations of the Constitution, are not entitled to deference. Under the APA, Roberts concluded, it thus remains the responsibility of the court to decide whether the law means what the agency says.
And this final piece here seems to be one of the main concerns that people who are against this ruling seem to bring up, including Justice Kagan in the writing of the dissent. And when I say people opposed, that makes it sound like I am opposing them, and I guess in a way I am, but I'm a real big believer in chaos theory, in case people haven't figured that out. And it's hard for me to place anything that happens into good or bad categories. There's certainly clearly catastrophically bad things, but even things that people would argue are amazingly good, I'm a little skeptical. But let's listen to this final bit.
Roberts rejected any suggestion that agencies, rather than courts, are better suited to determine what ambiguities in a federal law might mean, even when those ambiguities involve technical or scientific questions that fall within an agency's area of expertise. Roberts emphasized, Congress expects courts to handle technical statutory questions, and courts also have the benefit of briefing from the parties and friends of the court. Moreover, Roberts observed, even if courts should not defer to an agency's interpretation of an ambiguous statute that it administers, it can consider that interpretation when it falls within the agency's purview, a doctrine known as Skidmore deference.
So just to revisit history, a forgotten history, depending on who you are, in the supervision issue, where the concept of mandated direct supervision in 2009 with backwards applicability was fought quite hard by pretty much everyone. And it, to my knowledge, was never escalated to anyone suing CMS, probably because of Chevron deference. Because if at the time, let's say the AHA, the American Hospital Association, decided to take CMS to court, well, Chevron deference would dictate that the court would side with CMS. Now that Chevron deference is no more, how would that play out? So let's say, for example, a certain professional society advocated for a unique exception to general supervision and mandated direct supervision for just their specialty and got it into CMS regulations through some Hail Mary pass. In that scenario, you could sue CMS, or maybe sue is not the right word. You could challenge the regulation in a court of law. And this is what they mean by friends of the court, where, so when CMS makes a regulation now, or previously, you would have a comment period because, yes, there are experts in all of these federal agencies, but there's not experts for each and everything. That would be literally impossible. That's what the comment period is for. So when proposed regulations are put out for comment, you have other experts weighing in. I would argue we are all experts in radiation oncology. It's kind of our whole shtick. And, CMS can decide whether or not they want to listen to the comments. Whereas now you could actually have a more formal process than just a comment period. You could challenge it in court, and each side would have to bring their arguments and their expert witnesses and be heard in the public, and then a judge would make a decision. I think this is a much more preferable way than how it has been. And I'm not deaf to the concerns about overruling or repealing Chevron deference. Like, I get it, but it's interesting to hear the arguments about agency experts. And for most things, we're concerned about, like at the FDA, for example, the revolving door between industry and the FDA for most things. And so to imply that deferring always to federal agencies is superior than to having regulations challenged in a court of law, you can't be concrete about any of this stuff. Nothing is black and white. But in this case with ROCR, if through some insane stroke of luck, ROCR passes, which is, according to legislaw.com, I think it's legislaw.com, so 1% chance pass of ROCR, or 1% chance of ROCR passing, well, then it is the law of the land. So let's say in the future, if we stay in the current system, then CMS attempts ROAPM again. Because of the repeal of Chevron deference, we could challenge that in a court. We wouldn't necessarily just be stuck. We would have actual recourses that would have a chance to have an effect. Same with supervision, same with any other regulation that CMS could come out with. There's now a chance for us to actually have an ability, a mechanism by which we could change it. If we go rogue, unlike any other medical specialty ever, and have regulation laws passed specifying just our reimbursement, that ability goes away for us. Where I guess one of my concerns would be CMS would be still the one who administers ROCR. So if ROCR passes, there still needs to be an administration of the law. They would need to stand up a new part of their agency. So that's what people, like, this creates more work for CMS. So if ROCR passes, they need to create like an office of ROCR or something to administer our reimbursement. But if in that case, like, yes, if the office of ROCR, the division of ROCR in CMS changed some part of it or regulated some new aspect of it into existence that we didn't like, we could oppose it, sure. But whereas now within the regular traditional Medicare, which everyone else is under, we finally have an ability to fight back. And it's weird. I've been trying to find more people talking about what this means for medicine. I guess it just was on Friday, so I'll give people time, but this is huge. And it's just something to think about. But we'll leave it there for now. And I want people to just consider what's on the table and a reminder of the options that are open as if we are going so far as to consider creating brand new laws passed by the federal government to reimburse our specialty. Why in the world are we limiting ourselves to just staying in fee-for-service existing system or going into a classic bundled payment system? There are more choices. We can do better than this, which has been my point from the beginning, where if you engage the stakeholders, actually, some amazing ideas have been put out there by very smart people, smarter than me, and we could listen to them. That would be great. But instead, we've been shoehorned into this yes or no dichotomy, which is the falsest of false dichotomies. And I think we can do better. And I hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
This has been a Photon Media production. Don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to us. Be well and be Mom.